The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Marcus Richardson adjusted his name tag for the third time that evening. Just another Tuesday night shift at Henderson's Market in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Little did he know that in the next 20 minutes, a simple act of kindness would change the trajectory of his entire life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus had been working at Henderson's Market for 8 months. Now, ever since he'd dropped out of community college. The decision still weighed heavily on his mind every morning when he tied his green apron around his waist. At 22, he felt like he was watching his life through a window, seeing all the possibilities but unable to reach them. The grocery store sat on the corner of Maple Street and 3rd Avenue, a modest establishment that had served the Cedar Falls community for over 30 years. Old Henderson himself had retired 5 years ago, leaving his son Tommy to run the place. Tommy was decent enough, though he had a habit of cutting hours whenever sales dipped, which seemed to happen more frequently these days. Marcus worked the evening shift from 4 in the afternoon until closing at 10. It wasn't glamorous work, stocking shelves, helping customers find items, cleaning up spills, and manning the register when things got busy. But it was honest work, and it helped him cover his share of rent for the small apartment he shared. With his roommate Jake on the south side of town, the apartment was nothing special: 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with appliances that belonged in a museum, and a living room furnished with hand-me-downs from various relatives. But it was theirs, and Marcus took pride in keeping his space clean and organized. His bedroom walls were covered with printouts of architectural drawings and sketches he'd created during his brief stint at Kirkwood Community College. Architecture had always been his passion. Even as a kid, Marcus would spend hours building elaborate structures with whatever he could find: blocks, cardboard boxes, even arranging his dinner vegetables into miniature cities before his mother, Patricia, would scold him for playing with his food. Patricia Richardson had raised Marcus and his younger sister Emma as a single mother after their father walked out when Marcus was 12. Patricia worked double shifts at the Cedar Falls Medical Center as a nurse's aide, often coming home exhausted, but never too tired to ask about Marcus's day or help Emma with her homework. She'd supported Marcus's dream of becoming an architect, working extra shifts to help pay for his college expenses. When he dropped out after just 1 semester, citing financial pressures and academic struggles, Patricia didn't say much. But Marcus could see the disappointment in her eyes, mixed with understanding and unconditional love. The truth was, Marcus had struggled with the transition to college life. The coursework was demanding, and he found himself falling behind despite spending countless hours in the library. His part-time job at a local pizza place barely covered his textbooks, let alone living expenses. When his laptop died during finals week and he couldn't afford to replace it, Marcus made the difficult decision to withdraw and find full-time work instead. Emma, now 17 and a senior at Cedar Falls High School, was everything Marcus wished he could be: confident, academically gifted, and seemingly destined for success. She'd already been accepted to the University of Iowa with a partial scholarship and had her sights set on medical school. Sometimes Marcus wondered if he'd made the right choice, stepping aside so the family's limited resources could support Emma's education instead. Working at Henderson's Market wasn't the worst job in the world, but it wasn't where Marcus had imagined himself at 22. His co-workers were a mixed bunch. There was Betty, a woman in her 50s who'd been working retail her entire adult life and knew every customer's shopping habits by heart. She'd taken Marcus under her wing during his first few weeks, teaching him the subtle art of customer service and how to handle difficult situations with grace. Then there was Kevin, a part-timer who attended the University of Northern Iowa and, worked weekends to pay for gas and entertainment. Kevin was everything Marcus used to be, optimistic about the future, excited about his studies, and full of plans for after graduation. Sometimes talking to Kevin felt like looking at a parallel version of himself, one who'd managed to stay in school. The evening Marcus's life changed, started like any other. He'd arrived at work at his usual time, punched in, and began his routine of checking inventory and restocking items that had sold during the day shift. The store was quieter than usual for a Tuesday, just a handful of customers picking up last-minute dinner ingredients or forgotten items. Around 7:30, Marcus was organizing the cereal aisle when he heard Betty calling his name from the front of the store. A customer needed help reaching something from a high shelf in aisle 6, she said. Marcus made his way over, expecting to find the usual scenario, someone who needed a can of soup or a box of pasta from the top shelf. Instead, he found an elderly woman standing in front of the canned goods section, looking up with a mixture of determination and resignation. She was probably in her 70s, Marcus guessed, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and wearing a simple blue cardigan that had seen better days. Her shopping cart contained just a few items: a loaf of bread, a small container of milk, some eggs, and a can of soup. "Excuse me, young man," she said with a warm smile that reached her eyes. "I'm terribly sorry to bother you, but I can't quite reach the chicken noodle soup up there. These old bones aren't as cooperative as they used to be." Marcus smiled back and easily retrieved the can she'd pointed to. "No problem at all, ma'am. Anything else I can help you find?" She thanked him graciously and continued with her shopping. Marcus returned to his work, but something about the encounter stuck with him. There had been something in the woman's eyes, a quiet dignity mixed with what looked like worry or sadness. He'd seen that look before, during the months after. His father left, when his mother would stand in grocery store aisles calculating and recalculating whether they could afford everything in their cart. About 20 minutes later, Marcus was called to register 3 to help with the evening rush, though rush was a generous description for the modest stream of customers. He'd been ringing up purchases for about 10 minutes when he saw the elderly woman from aisle 6 approaching his line. She moved slowly, but with purpose, pushing her small cart with careful precision. When she reached his register, Marcus greeted her with genuine warmth. "Find everything you need tonight?" "Yes. Thank you so much for your help earlier," she replied, beginning to unload her modest selection of items onto the conveyor belt. As Marcus scanned each item, he couldn't help but notice her hands. They were elegant despite their age, with well-maintained nails and a simple gold wedding band that looked like it had been worn for decades. The total came to $23.47. The woman opened her purse, a small, well-worn leather bag that had clearly been expensive once upon a time, and began counting out bills and change with meticulous care. Marcus waited patiently as she sorted through what appeared to be mostly 1s and 5s, along with a small pile of quarters and dimes. After counting twice, she looked up with an apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry, dear. I seem to be just a little short. Could you remove the soup, please? I can manage without it tonight." Marcus glanced at the items she'd selected. Basic necessities, nothing extravagant or unnecessary. The chicken noodle soup cost $1.89. She was short by less than $2 for what amounted to a simple dinner. Without thinking, Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a $5 bill. "Please, let me take care of it," he said quietly, adding his money to hers. "Everyone deserves a good meal." The woman's eyes widened in surprise, then filled with something that looked like gratitude mixed with emotion she was trying to contain. "Oh, sweetheart, I couldn't possibly—" "It's already done," Marcus said gently, completing the transaction and beginning to bag her groceries. "Really, it's no trouble at all." For a moment the woman seemed at a loss for words. Then she reached across the counter and placed her hand briefly over his. "Thank you," she said simply. "You have no idea how much this means to me." As Marcus handed her the bag of groceries, she looked directly into his eyes. "What's your name, young man?" "Marcus Richardson, ma'am." "Well, Marcus Richardson, you're a good person. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She paused, as if she wanted to say more, then simply smiled. "I hope life brings you everything you deserve." Marcus watched as she walked slowly toward the exit, something tugging at his chest. There had been something almost regal about her, bearing, despite the worn cardigan and the careful counting of change, something that suggested her current circumstances might not reflect her entire story. Betty appeared at his elbow as the woman disappeared through the automatic doors. "That was real nice of what you did there, Marcus," she said approvingly. "Mrs. Whitmore's been shopping here for years, ever since she moved to Cedar Falls. Always polite, always grateful. But I've noticed her purchases getting smaller and smaller lately." "Mrs. Whitmore?" Marcus asked. "Eleanor Whitmore. Sweet lady. Lives alone in one of those little apartments over on Elm Street. I think she's having a tough time making ends meet on her Social Security." Betty shook her head sympathetically. "Breaks your heart, doesn't it? People who worked their whole lives and then—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Marcus understood. He'd seen it before. Elderly people forced to choose between medication and food, heat and groceries. The fact that his small gesture had meant so much to Mrs. Whitmore suggested she was facing exactly those kinds of impossible choices. The rest of Marcus's shift passed uneventfully, but he found his thoughts returning to Eleanor Whitmore. Something about their brief interaction had affected him more than he expected. Maybe it was the dignity with which she'd handled her embarrassment, or the genuine gratitude in her eyes, or simply the recognition of someone doing their best in difficult circumstances. Something Marcus understood all too well. As he drove home that night in his 13-year-old Honda Civic, Marcus reflected on the evening's events. $5 wasn't much to him, about half an hour's wages, but it had clearly meant something significant to Mrs. Whitmore. It reminded him of something his mother used to tell him and Emma when they were kids. "It's not about how much you have, but what you do with what you've got that defines who you are." Marcus had grown up understanding that kindness didn't require wealth, and that sometimes the smallest gestures could have the biggest impact. Tonight had been a reminder of that truth, though he had no way of knowing just how prophetic Mrs. Whitmore's parting words would prove to be. 3 days passed before Marcus saw Eleanor Whitmore again. It was Friday evening, and the store was busier than usual with weekend shoppers stocking up for the next few days. Marcus was working register, too, when he spotted her familiar figure entering through the automatic doors, moving with that same careful precision he remembered. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This time, her cart contained even fewer items, just some tea bags, a small carton of orange juice, and what looked like a single banana. Marcus felt a pang of concern as he watched her navigate the aisles, taking her time to examine prices before making her selections. When she approached his register, Eleanor's face lit up with recognition. "Marcus, how wonderful to see you again, dear." "Good evening, Mrs. Whitmore," Marcus replied, genuinely pleased to see her. "How have you been?" "Oh, just fine. Thank you for asking." She began placing her few items on the counter, and Marcus noticed her hands had a slight tremor that hadn't been there before. "I wanted to thank you again for your kindness the other day. It really made a difference." As Marcus scanned her purchases, he calculated the total in his head. Less than $6. For someone's weekend groceries, it seemed impossibly small. When the register displayed $5.73, Eleanor opened her purse and began the familiar process of counting out exact change. This time, she had enough, but Marcus noticed she was left with only a few coins afterward. As he bagged her items, an idea occurred to him. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening, "I was wondering if you might like some company sometime. I mean, if you ever want someone to talk to or need help with anything around your apartment." Eleanor looked surprised, then touched. "That's very kind of you to offer, dear, but I wouldn't want to impose on your free time." "It wouldn't be an imposition at all," Marcus assured her. "I don't work weekends, and to be honest, I could use the company. Myself, maybe I could stop by Sunday afternoon. I make a pretty decent cup of coffee." Eleanor hesitated for a moment, then smiled warmly. "I would like that very much. I live at Sunset Gardens on Elm Street, apartment 4B. Would 2 o'clock work for you?" "Perfect. I'll see you then." As Eleanor left, Marcus felt a strange sense of anticipation. There was something about this woman that intrigued him beyond their initial encounter. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, despite her obvious financial struggles, or the intelligence that sparkled in her eyes when she spoke. Whatever it was, he found himself looking forward to Sunday. Sunday afternoon arrived crisp and clear, with the kind of autumn air that made Cedar Falls look like a postcard. Marcus drove to Elm Street, carrying a small bag containing coffee beans he'd splurged on at the local roastery, along with some pastries from the bakery downtown. He figured if he was going to visit, he should bring something to contribute. Sunset Gardens turned out to be a modest apartment complex that had seen better days. The building was clean but dated, with small balconies overlooking a courtyard that probably bloomed beautifully in spring, but now showed the bare branches of late October. Marcus climbed to the second floor and found apartment 4B, Eleanor answered. The door, wearing a navy blue dress that, like her cardigan earlier in the week, appeared to be of good quality despite its age. Her apartment was small, but immaculately maintained, with furniture that spoke of better times, a mahogany dining table, a bookshelf filled with leather-bound volumes, and several pieces of artwork that looked original rather than prints. "Welcome to my humble home," Eleanor said, gesturing for Marcus to enter. "Please make yourself comfortable." As Marcus looked around, he was struck by the apartment's character. The walls were lined with framed photographs showing Eleanor at various stages of her life. As a young woman in graduation cap and gown, standing beside a tall man in what appeared to be a wedding photo, shaking hands with people in business. Attire at what looked like formal events. "You have a beautiful home," Marcus said sincerely. "And these photographs are fascinating. You've lived quite a life." Eleanor's eyes followed his gaze to the photos, and her expression grew wistful. "Yes, I suppose I have. That seems like another lifetime now, though." She led him to the small kitchen, where Marcus insisted on preparing the coffee, while Eleanor arranged the pastries on a china plate that was clearly part of a set that had once graced more formal occasions. "Tell me about yourself, Marcus," Eleanor said, as they settled in her living room with their coffee. "What are your dreams? What do you hope to do with your life?" Marcus found himself opening up in ways he rarely did with people he'd just met. He told her about his interrupted college experience, his passion for architecture, his concerns about his family's finances, and his uncertainty about the future. Eleanor listened with the kind of focused attention that made Marcus feel like every word mattered. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, then leaned forward slightly. "You know, Marcus, I spent 43 years in the business world, and I learned something important. Success isn't about where you start. It's about what you do when faced with obstacles. The fact that you step back to help your family shows character that many people twice your age haven't developed." "But I feel like I'm stuck," Marcus admitted. "Everyone else is moving forward with their lives, and I'm just treading water." Eleanor set down her coffee cup and fixed him with a steady gaze. "Let me tell you something about treading water. It's one of the most important survival skills there is. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay afloat until the current changes. She stood and walked to her bookshelf, pulling out a leather-bound photo album. Returning to her seat, she opened it to reveal pictures from what appeared to be a corporate setting, board meetings, ribbon cuttings, formal dinners. I wasn't always living in a small apartment, counting change for groceries, Eleanor said softly. I spent most of my career as an executive at First National Bank of Iowa. Started as a secretary in 1962. Worked my way up through every department and eventually became president in 1987. Marcus stared at the photographs, trying to reconcile the images of a confident businesswoman in power suits with the elderly lady carefully counting out grocery. Money. I was the first woman to hold that position in the bank's history, Eleanor continued. It wasn't easy. There were plenty of people who thought I didn't belong in that office. But I believed in working hard, treating people fairly, and never forgetting where I came from. What happened? Marcus asked gently. Eleanor's expression grew sad. My husband Richard was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 1998. I took early retirement to care for him. We'd saved well over the years, but medical care, it's expensive, very expensive. Richard lived for 8 years after his diagnosis, and by the time he passed, most of our savings were gone. She turned a page in the album, revealing a photo of herself and a distinguished-looking man at what appeared to be a retirement party. I don't regret a single penny we spent on his care, she said firmly. Richard was my partner in everything. He supported my career when other husbands expected their wives to stay home, celebrated every promotion, and never once made me feel like I should apologize for my ambitions. Marcus felt a lump forming in his throat. Mrs. Whitmore, I had no idea. I'm so sorry for your loss. Thank you, dear, but I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I want you to understand something important. Life has seasons. Sometimes you're building, sometimes you're maintaining, and sometimes you're rebuilding. Each season requires different strengths. She closed the album and looked directly at Marcus. Right now, you're in a rebuilding season. You're taking care of your family, working honestly, and staying true to your values. That's not failure, that's preparation. They spent the next 2 hours talking about everything from architecture to business principles, from family loyalty to personal dreams. Eleanor shared stories from her banking career, describing the satisfaction of helping small businesses get their start and watching the community grow and prosper. Banking isn't just about money, she explained. It's about understanding people's dreams and figuring out how to help them achieve those dreams responsibly. Every loan I approved, every business plan I reviewed, every financial crisis I helped someone navigate. It was all about seeing potential where others might see risk. Marcus found himself hanging on every word. Eleanor spoke with the wisdom of someone who had seen economic cycles come and go, who had navigated corporate politics with grace, and who had learned to balance professional success with personal relationships. As the afternoon stretched into early evening, Marcus realized he hadn't felt this intellectually stimulated in months. Eleanor had a way of asking questions that made him think deeper about his own motivations and goals. You know, she said as they finished their second cup of coffee, I still maintain some connections in the business community. Cedar Falls may be small, but there are opportunities here for someone with vision and determination. I appreciate that, Mrs. Whitmore, but I don't have a college degree and I don't have any real business experience. Eleanor smiled knowingly. Some of the most successful people I knew in business were those who learned through experience rather than textbooks. There's something to be said for understanding how the world actually works. As Marcus prepared to leave, Eleanor walked him to the door. Thank you for a lovely afternoon, Marcus. It's been a long time since I've had such an engaging conversation. Thank you for sharing your stories with me, Marcus replied. I feel like I understand so much more about a lot of things. Eleanor squeezed his hand gently. Would you like to come by again next Sunday? I have more stories, and I'd love to hear how your week goes. I would love that, Marcus said sincerely. As he drove home, Marcus's mind was spinning with everything Eleanor had shared. The revelation about her past had completely shifted his understanding of who she was and what their encounter at the grocery store had really meant. She wasn't just any elderly woman struggling financially. She was someone who had achieved remarkable success, who had broken barriers and led with distinction, and who was now facing the reality that even the most successful lives could take unexpected turns. More than that, though, Marcus felt inspired by Eleanor's perspective on life's seasons. Maybe he wasn't stuck after all. Maybe he was exactly where he needed to be, building the character and understanding that would serve him well when his next opportunity arrived. The following week brought an unexpected change to Marcus's routine. Tommy Henderson approached him during his Wednesday shift with an unusual request. "Marcus, I need someone to handle the inventory management project," Tommy said, holding a clipboard thick with order forms and supplier contracts. "Betty's been doing it for years, but her arthritis is acting up, and all that computer work is getting tough for her. You interested in taking it on? It would mean an extra 10 hours a week and a small bump in pay." Marcus accepted immediately, not just for the additional income, but because the work seemed more engaging than his usual tasks. The inventory system required analyzing sales patterns, predicting demand, and coordinating with multiple suppliers, skills that felt more aligned with his natural analytical abilities. When Sunday arrived, Marcus found himself eager to share this development with Eleanor. He arrived at her apartment carrying a small potted plant he'd noticed at the grocery store, a vibrant African violet that he thought might brighten her kitchen windowsill. "How thoughtful!" Eleanor exclaimed, accepting the plant with genuine delight. "I haven't had fresh flowers in ages. This will be perfect right here where I can see it while I'm cooking." As they settled into their now familiar spots in her living room, Marcus told her about the inventory management opportunity. Eleanor listened with the same focused attention she'd shown the previous week, but this time her questions were more pointed and business-oriented. "Tell me about the suppliers you're working with," she said. "What are their payment terms? How reliable are their delivery schedules? Do you have backup vendors for critical items?" Marcus realized he didn't know the answers to many of her questions, but instead of feeling embarrassed, he found himself intrigued by the complexity he hadn't considered. "These are the kinds of details that separate successful businesses from struggling ones," Eleanor explained. "Every aspect of operations is connected. If your supplier relationships are solid, your customers are happy. If your inventory management is efficient, your cash flow improves. If your cash flow is strong, you can invest in growth." She stood and retrieved a different photo album from her bookshelf, this one filled with images of ribbon cuttings, groundbreaking ceremonies, and handshake agreements. "During my time at First National, I worked with hundreds of small businesses," Eleanor said, turning the pages slowly. "I learned that the entrepreneurs who succeeded weren't necessarily the ones with the most money or the best initial ideas. They were the ones who understood that every detail mattered and who were willing to learn from people who had walked the path before them." She pointed to a photograph showing her shaking hands with a young man in front of what appeared to be a small storefront. "This is David Chen. He came to me in 1989 wanting to open a computer repair shop. Personal computers were just becoming popular, and most people thought it was a crazy idea. But David had done his homework. He understood his market, he had realistic financial projections, and he was willing to start small and grow systematically." "What happened to him?" Marcus asked. "Chen Technologies now has 12 locations across Iowa and employs over 200 people," Eleanor said with evident pride. "David still sends me a Christmas card every year." She turned to another page, showing a middle-aged woman standing in front of a bakery. This is Maria Santos, single mother, no college education, but she made the best tres leches cake I'd ever tasted. She wanted to turn her hobby into a business, but she didn't know anything about commercial licensing, health department regulations, or business accounting. Did you approve her loan? Not initially, Eleanor admitted. Her first business plan was more hope than strategy, but I didn't just send her away. I spent 3 months working with her, teaching her what she needed to know, connecting her with other successful restaurant owners, helping her understand the realities of the food service industry. Eleanor's eyes grew warm with the memory. When Maria came back with her revised plan, it was completely different. Realistic timelines, proper market research, contingency planning. Santos Bakery operated successfully for 15 years until Maria retired and sold it to her daughter. Marcus found himself leaning forward, captivated by these stories of transformation and success. You didn't just lend money, you taught people how to succeed. Exactly, Eleanor said. Money is just a tool. Knowledge and mentorship are what actually build sustainable businesses and create lasting prosperity. She closed the album and looked at Marcus intently, which brings me to something I've been thinking about since our conversation last week. How would you feel about learning some of these principles firsthand? What do you mean? Eleanor stood and walked to a desk in the corner of her living room, returning with a leather portfolio. I may be retired, but I still have contacts throughout the business community. There are opportunities in Cedar Falls for someone with vision and determination. But first, you need to understand how business really works. She opened the portfolio to reveal newspaper clippings, business cards, and handwritten notes. The Henderson family has owned that grocery store for 3 decades, but they're struggling to compete with the big chains. Their profit margins are shrinking, their customer base is aging, and they haven't adapted to changing shopping patterns. Marcus felt a chill of recognition. He'd noticed the patterns Eleanor was describing: fewer customers during peak hours, empty shelves that stayed empty longer, and Tommy's increasingly frequent mentions of tight budgets. But here's what the Henderson family doesn't see, Eleanor continued, pulling out a detailed map of Cedar Falls. The demographics of this town are changing. Young families are moving into the new developments on the west side, but they're driving 20 minutes to the big box stores because they can't find what they need locally. She traced her finger along several streets on the map. There's an opportunity here for someone who understands both traditional retail and modern consumer needs. The question is whether Tommy Henderson is willing to evolve or whether someone else will fill that gap. Marcus studied the map, seeing the town he'd lived in his entire life through completely new eyes. You think Henderson's market could compete with the big chains? Not by trying to be like them, Eleanor said, but by being something they can't be: personal, flexible, community-focused. The big stores excel at volume and price, but they can't provide the kind of customer service and local connection that a well-run independent store can offer. She pulled out another document, what appeared to be a business analysis written in Eleanor's precise handwriting. I've been observing retail trends for the past few years, and I've identified several strategies that could revitalize a store like Henderson's. The question is whether you're interested in learning how to implement them. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. You're talking about me learning to run a business? I'm talking about you learning to think like a business owner, Eleanor corrected. Whether you end up running Henderson's Market, starting your own venture, or pursuing something completely different, these principles will serve you well. Over the next hour, Eleanor outlined what she called the Foundation Program, an informal curriculum that would teach Marcus the fundamentals of business operations, financial management, customer psychology, and strategic planning. We'll start with analyzing Henderson's current operations, she explained. You'll learn to read financial statements, understand profit margins, identify inefficiencies, and recognize opportunities. Then we'll study successful independent retailers in similar markets to see what strategies work. The scope of what Eleanor was proposing was both exciting and intimidating. Mrs. Whitmore, this sounds incredible, but I don't understand why you'd want to invest this much time in helping me. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting to the window where the African violet sat catching the afternoon light. When I was your age, a senior banker named Robert Fitzgerald took me under his wing. I was just a secretary then, but Mr. Fitzgerald saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. He taught me to think strategically, to understand the bigger picture, to see opportunities where others saw only problems. She turned back to Marcus with a gentle smile. Mr. Fitzgerald used to say that knowledge was only valuable if it was shared. He invested in me not because he had to, but because he believed that helping others succeed was the highest form of success. You want to pay forward what he did for you, Marcus said, understanding. Partly, Eleanor acknowledged, but also because I see in you the same qualities that Mr. Fitzgerald must have seen in me: intelligence, integrity, and the willingness to work hard for something meaningful. Those qualities are rare, Marcus, and they shouldn't be wasted. As their afternoon together drew to a close, Eleanor handed Marcus a small notebook bound in leather. This was my first business journal. I want you to have it. Start recording your observations about Henderson's market, customer patterns, inventory issues, operational inefficiencies, anything that strikes you as important. Marcus accepted the journal with reverence, understanding that he was being given more than just a notebook. I don't know how to thank you for this opportunity. Thank me by taking it seriously, Eleanor said. Business education isn't just about theories and formulas. It's about developing the ability to see clearly, think critically, and act decisively. If you're willing to do the work, I'm willing to be your teacher. As Marcus drove home that evening, he felt a sense of possibility that had been absent from his life for months. The journal sat on the passenger seat beside him, and he found himself already thinking about what he would write in it. For the first time since dropping out of college, he felt like he was moving towards something, rather than just maintaining his current position. The African violet had been a simple gesture of friendship, but Eleanor's offer of mentorship was something far more significant, a chance to transform not just his circumstances, but his entire understanding of what was possible for his future. Marcus threw himself into his new role with an enthusiasm that surprised even him. Eleanor's leather journal became his constant companion, filled with observations that ranged from peak shopping hours to supplier delivery patterns. What had once seemed like routine grocery store operations now revealed layers of complexity and opportunity. During his first week of detailed observation, Marcus noticed that Wednesday mornings brought a specific demographic: working mothers shopping before their afternoon shifts, often with young children in tow. They moved quickly through the store, grabbed necessities, and frequently left without purchasing items from the deli or bakery sections simply because the wait times were too long. He documented everything: the 3:30 p.m. rush when high school students stopped by for snacks, the Thursday evening surge of customers preparing for weekend guests, the Sunday morning exodus after church services ended across town. Each pattern told a story about unmet needs and missed opportunities. Tommy Henderson noticed the change in Marcus immediately. "You've been asking a lot of questions lately," he commented one Thursday evening as Marcus reorganized the storage room according to a new system he'd devised based on turnover rates and seasonal demands. "Just trying to understand how everything works together," Marcus replied, not mentioning his partnership with Eleanor. "I think there might be ways to improve our efficiency." Tommy looked skeptical but interested. "Such as?" Marcus had been waiting for this opening, Well, for instance, our produce deliveries come Tuesday and Friday, but our busiest produce sales are Wednesday through Sunday. By Monday, we're running low on the items people want most, so they're shopping elsewhere for those items and probably buying their other groceries there too. It was a simple observation, but Tommy's expression suggested he'd never considered the connection between delivery schedules and customer satisfaction. So, what would you suggest? Maybe we could negotiate with our produce supplier for Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday deliveries. Keep the freshest items available when people actually want to buy them. Tommy made a non-committal sound, but Marcus could see him processing the idea. That afternoon, he overheard Tommy on the phone with their produce vendor discussing modified delivery schedules. Eleanor was delighted when Marcus shared this development during their Sunday meeting. "You've identified one of the fundamental principles of retail success, alignment between supply and demand," she said approvingly. "But that's just the beginning. Tell me what else you've observed." Marcus opened his journal and began reading from his notes. He'd identified 17 different operational improvements, from better product placement strategies to more efficient checkout procedures. Eleanor listened to each one, occasionally asking probing questions that helped Marcus think deeper about the implications of his suggestions. "Now," Eleanor said when he finished, "let's talk about the business side of these improvements. Every change you implement has costs and benefits. How do we measure whether these changes actually improve the store's profitability?" She pulled out a manila folder containing what appeared to be financial statements. "I've been doing some research into Henderson's Market's public filings. They're not required to disclose detailed financial information, but there are ways to estimate their performance based on industry standards and observable metrics." For the next 2 hours, Eleanor taught Marcus how to read a profit and loss statement, understand cash flow cycles, and calculate key performance indicators. She showed him how to estimate gross margins, overhead costs, and inventory turnover rates. Henderson's Market is probably operating on profit margins between 8 and 12%, Eleanor explained, pointing to her calculations. That means, for every dollar of sales, they're keeping 8 to 12 cents as profit. When you understand how thin those margins are, you realize why small efficiency improvements can have such a significant impact. Marcus studied the numbers with growing fascination. So if we could increase customer traffic by just 10%, or improve our average transaction size by $1 or $2? Exactly. Small changes compound into substantial improvements. This is why successful business owners focus on continuous optimization rather than hoping for dramatic breakthroughs. Eleanor opened another folder, this one containing articles and case studies from trade publications. "I want you to read about 3 independent grocery stores that successfully competed with big box retailers. Study their strategies, understand their innovations, and think about which approaches might work in Cedar Falls." The materials Eleanor provided were unlike anything Marcus had encountered in his brief college experience. These weren't theoretical concepts. They were real-world solutions implemented by people facing exactly the challenges that Henderson's Market confronted daily. Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself viewing his job through completely different eyes. The grocery store became his laboratory, and every shift provided new opportunities to test theories and observe customer behavior. He began engaging customers in casual conversations, learning about their shopping preferences, their frustrations, and their unmet needs. Mrs. Patterson, a regular customer, mentioned that she drove to the big chain store across town specifically for organic produce options. Mr. Williams complained about the limited selection of international foods. Sarah Chen, a young mother with twins, expressed frustration that the store didn't offer online ordering with curbside pickup. Each conversation added to Marcus's growing understanding of market gaps and potential solutions. He documented everything. In Eleanor's journal, creating what amounted to an unofficial market research study. The breakthrough came during a particularly busy Saturday morning. Marcus was working the express lane when he noticed a pattern that had been hiding in plain sight. Customers with small orders, those buying just a few items, were waiting in the same lines as people with full shopping carts. The express lane helped, but it wasn't enough during peak times. More importantly, Marcus realized that many of these small-order customers were making impulse purchases of convenience items, energy drinks, candy, magazines, but only if they could get through checkout quickly. When forced to wait behind larger orders, they often abandoned these impulse items rather than stand in line. That afternoon, Marcus approached Tommy with a carefully prepared proposal. Using the business analysis techniques Eleanor had taught him, he presented data showing that faster checkout times for small purchases could increase impulse sales by an estimated 15 to 20%. "What are you suggesting?" Tommy asked, studying Marcus's handwritten analysis. "Self-checkout stations," Marcus said. "Not the big elaborate systems the chain stores use, but simple stations for customers with just a few items. They could scan, pay, and leave without waiting in line." Tommy frowned. "Those systems are expensive, and what about theft?" Marcus had anticipated these objections. "I researched the costs. For a basic two-station setup, we're looking at about $8,000 up front. Based on our current transaction volume, the increased impulse sales alone would pay for the investment within 18 months. As for theft, studies show that losses from self-checkout are typically offset by increased sales volume." For the first time since Marcus had known him, Tommy Henderson looked genuinely impressed. "Where did you learn to put together an analysis like this?" "I've been doing some reading about retail operations," Marcus said, not wanting to reveal Eleanor's involvement. "I think there are a lot of opportunities to improve our competitiveness." Tommy studied the proposal for several more minutes, put together a more detailed plan, include vendor quotes, installation requirements, everything. "If the numbers really work out the way you're suggesting, maybe we should consider it." That evening, Marcus drove to Eleanor's apartment with barely contained excitement. When he shared the news about Tommy's interest in his proposal, Eleanor's smile was radiant with pride. "This is exactly what successful entrepreneurs do," she said. "They identify problems, research solutions, calculate costs and benefits, and present compelling cases for change. You've just demonstrated that you understand the fundamentals of business innovation." She pulled out yet another folder, this one thick with vendor information, industry reports, and implementation guidelines. "Now comes the real work. Tommy has asked you to prove that your idea will succeed. That means creating a comprehensive business case that addresses every possible concern and objection." Over the next 3 hours, Eleanor guided Marcus through the process of developing a professional business proposal. They researched self-checkout vendors, calculated precise return on investment projections, analyzed competitive advantages, and identified potential implementation challenges. "Remember," Eleanor said, as they worked through the financial models, "a good business proposal doesn't just show why something should work. It proves why it will work. Tommy is going to risk $8,000 based on your analysis. You need to be absolutely certain that your projections are conservative and achievable." By the end of the evening, Marcus had learned more about project planning, financial analysis, and business presentation than he'd absorbed in his entire semester of college business courses. More importantly, he discovered that he had a natural aptitude for this kind of strategic thinking. As he prepared to leave, Eleanor handed him a final surprise, a professional portfolio folder embossed with his initials. "For your presentation to Tommy," she explained, "first impressions matter. In business, if you present your proposal professionally, people take your ideas seriously." Marcus accepted the portfolio with a sense of ceremony. In just a few weeks, he'd transformed from a grocery store clerk going through the motions to someone developing sophisticated business strategies. The change felt profound and irreversible. "Eleanor," he said, using her first name for the first time, "I don't think I can ever adequately express what this mentorship means to me." "The best way to thank me is to succeed," she replied warmly. "And then someday, to pass along what you've learned to someone else who needs guidance." As Marcus drove home, he realized that his entire relationship with work, learning, and possibility had fundamentally shifted. Tomorrow, he would present a business proposal that could change the trajectory of Henderson's market. More importantly, he would do it with confidence born from real knowledge and careful preparation. The journal that had started as a simple gift was now filled with insights that represented the foundation of his business education. But Marcus understood that the real transformation wasn't in the notebook. It was in his growing ability to see opportunities where others saw only challenges. Marcus spent the entire week refining his self-checkout proposal, working late into the night to ensure every detail was perfect. Eleanor had taught him that thorough preparation was the difference between good ideas and successful implementations. By Friday afternoon, his presentation folder contained detailed vendor comparisons, installation timelines, training protocols, and conservative financial projections that showed a clear path to profitability. Tommy Henderson had scheduled their meeting for Monday morning, giving Marcus the weekend to practice his presentation. But when he arrived at Eleanor's apartment that Sunday, he found her sitting at her kitchen table with an expression he'd never seen before, a mixture of excitement and something that looked almost like nervousness. "Marcus, I need to tell you something before you present your proposal tomorrow," Eleanor said, gesturing for him to sit across from her. "Something I probably should have mentioned weeks ago." She reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick envelope bearing the letterhead of First National Bank of Iowa. The return address made Marcus's stomach tighten with concern. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "Is this about your finances?" Eleanor's laugh was warm, but carried an undertone he couldn't quite identify. "In a way, yes, but not in the way you're thinking." She opened the envelope and spread several documents across the table. "Marcus, I haven't been entirely honest with you about my current situation. The documents appeared to be financial statements, but the numbers were unlike anything Marcus had expected. Instead of the modest Social Security income he'd assumed, Eleanor was living on. The statements showed substantial investment accounts, rental property income, and what appeared to be a significant pension from First National Bank. "I don't understand," Marcus said, studying the papers with growing confusion. "These accounts, they show considerable assets." Eleanor nodded slowly. "When I retired to care for Richard, I didn't actually exhaust our savings on his medical care. I mean, his treatment was expensive, but we had planned well. Very well. The truth is, I'm quite comfortable financially." Marcus felt a strange disconnection from reality. "But the grocery store, counting change. I saw you struggle. To afford soup. You saw me choose to live simply," Eleanor corrected gently. "After Richard passed, I moved to a smaller apartment because the house felt too empty, not because I couldn't afford to maintain it. I shop carefully because I spent 40 years in banking, watching people waste money on unnecessary purchases. And that night when I was short on groceries," she paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "I had exactly enough money in my purse to cover my groceries that night, but I wanted to see what kind of person you were when faced with someone in apparent need. It was a test, Marcus, though not one I'd planned in advance." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. "You were testing me?" "Not maliciously," Eleanor said quickly, reaching across the table toward him, "and certainly not initially. When I went shopping that Tuesday night, I genuinely miscalculated what I had in my purse. but when you offered to help without hesitation, when you didn't make me feel ashamed or pitied, I realized I'd encountered something rare, genuine kindness from someone who had little to spare. She pulled out another document, this one bearing the official seal of First National Bank. After that first encounter, I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I called the bank and asked them to run a background check on you. Marcus stared at the document, which appeared to be some kind of character assessment. His name was at the top, followed by several pages of information he didn't remember providing to anyone. Your work history, your family situation, your academic record, your financial responsibility. It all painted a picture of someone with strong character facing temporary setbacks. So I decided to learn more about you by pretending to be poor, Marcus said, his voice carrying a note of hurt he couldn't suppress. By giving you opportunities to show who you really are, Eleanor corrected. Marcus, do you have any idea how many people walk past someone in need every single day? How many grocery store employees would have simply removed an item from the order without a second thought? Your instinct was to help, even when it cost you money you couldn't easily afford to spend. Eleanor stood and walked to her window, looking out at the late afternoon sky. I've interviewed hundreds of loan applicants over the years. I've seen business plans from MBA graduates and presentations from experienced executives. But I've rarely encountered the combination of natural business instinct, genuine character, and willingness to learn that you've demonstrated these past few weeks. She turned back to face him, and Marcus saw something in her expression that he was beginning to recognize, the look of someone about to make a significant business proposition. Which brings me to why I asked you here today, before your presentation to Tommy Henderson. Eleanor returned to the table and pulled out one final document. I want to make you an offer. The document was a preliminary partnership agreement, professionally prepared and bearing the letterhead of a Cedar Falls law firm. Marcus's name appeared multiple times throughout the text, alongside terms like business partnership, initial investment, and equity participation. I've been watching Henderson's Market for months, long before I met you, Eleanor explained. Tommy is a good man, but he's not a natural businessman. The store is slowly failing, not because there isn't demand for what it could offer, but because it's being managed reactively rather than strategically. She pointed to specific clauses in the partnership agreement. Tommy owes approximately $40,000 to various suppliers, and his lease is up for renewal in 6 months. He's facing a choice between closing the store or finding a way to modernize and compete effectively. Marcus felt his heart racing as he began to understand what Eleanor was proposing. You want to buy into Henderson's Market? I want us to buy into Henderson's Market, Eleanor corrected. As partners, I provide the capital and business experience. You provide the operational knowledge and day-to-day management. Together, we transform Henderson's into the kind of community-focused, efficiently run independent grocery store that can compete successfully with the big chains. The scope of what Eleanor was suggesting was overwhelming. Mrs. Whitmore, Eleanor, I don't know anything about running a business. You know more than you think, she replied firmly. Your proposal for self-checkout stations isn't just a good idea. It's the kind of innovative thinking that successful businesses require. Your analysis of customer patterns and operational inefficiencies shows natural business instincts that can't be taught. She spread out additional documents, market research, competitive analysis, and financial projections that went far beyond what Marcus had prepared for his presentation. I've been developing a comprehensive business plan for revitalizing Henderson's Market. Your observations and suggestions have confirmed that my initial assessment was correct. There's tremendous potential here for someone willing to implement the right strategies. Marcus studied the documents with growing amazement. Eleanor's business plan addressed every challenge he'd identified and proposed solutions he hadn't even considered. Online ordering systems, expanded product lines targeting young families, partnerships with local farms for fresh produce, community events to build customer loyalty. It was a complete transformation strategy. The initial investment would be approximately $150,000. Eleanor continued. That covers Tommy's debt, store renovations, new equipment, expanded inventory, and operating capital for the first year. In exchange, we would acquire 60% ownership of the business, with Tommy retaining 40% as the founding owner. The numbers were staggering to Marcus, but Eleanor presented them as casually as she might discuss grocery prices. "What would my role be in all this?" he asked. "General Manager and Operations Director," Eleanor said without hesitation. "You would oversee day-to-day operations, implement efficiency improvements, manage customer relations, and coordinate with suppliers. Essentially, you'd run the store." Marcus felt simultaneously exhilarated and terrified. "Eleanor, I'm 22 years old. I don't have a college degree. I've been working at Henderson's for 8 months. Age and credentials don't create successful businesses," Eleanor replied. "Vision, dedication, and the ability to execute strategies do. You've demonstrated all 3 qualities." She leaned forward, her expression intense with conviction. "Marcus, I spent 43 years in banking, and I learned to recognize potential when I saw it. You have something that can't be taught in business school, the ability to see what others miss, and the character to follow through on your insights." The partnership agreement lay between them on the table, representing possibilities that Marcus had never dared to imagine. "Why me?" he asked quietly. "With your resources and experience, you could partner with anyone." Eleanor's smile was gentle but determined. "Because 6 weeks ago, you spent $5 you couldn't afford to help someone you thought needed assistance. Because you've approached every challenge I've given you with thoroughness and integrity. Because you see Henderson's Market not as a failing business, but as an unrealized opportunity." She gathered the documents into a neat stack. "I'm not asking for an answer today. Take time to think about what this means. Discuss it with your family. Consider the risks as well as the opportunities." Marcus stared at the partnership agreement, trying to process the magnitude of what Eleanor was offering. 6 weeks ago, he'd been a grocery store clerk with no clear direction for his future. Now someone was proposing to make him a business partner in an enterprise that could transform both his life and his community. "There's one more thing," Eleanor said, her voice taking on a softer tone. "Regardless of whether you accept this in partnership, I want you to know that these weeks of mentoring you have been among the most rewarding I've experienced since retiring. You've reminded me why I loved banking in the first place, the satisfaction of helping someone realize their potential." As Marcus prepared to leave that evening, his mind was spinning with possibilities and questions. The journal that had started as a simple gift had led to a business education that was now culminating in an opportunity he'd never imagined possible. Eleanor walked him to the door, placing her hand briefly on his shoulder. "Whatever you decide, Marcus, remember this. Success isn't about avoiding risks, it's about taking calculated risks based on solid preparation and unwavering commitment to excellence." The drive home felt surreal. In 24 hours, Marcus would present his self-checkout proposal to Tommy Henderson. But now that presentation carried implications far beyond a simple operational improvement. It could be the first step toward becoming a business owner himself. Marcus barely slept that Sunday night. Eleanor's partnership proposal consumed his thoughts, each possibility spinning through his mind like items on a conveyor belt. By 5 in the morning, he'd abandoned any pretense of rest and sat at his small kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a legal pad, trying to organize his thoughts. The presentation to Tommy was scheduled for 9 o'clock, just 4 hours away. What had seemed like a straightforward business proposal now carried the weight of a potential life-changing decision. Marcus found himself sketching out two different futures. One where he remained an employee with good ideas, another where he became a business owner with real responsibility for success or failure. At 7:30, his phone rang. His mother's voice carried the familiar mix of concern and determination that had carried their family through countless challenges. "Marcus, honey, you sounded strange when you called yesterday. Is everything all right with your job?" Marcus had mentioned the presentation to his family, but hadn't revealed Eleanor's partnership offer. The magnitude of the opportunity felt too enormous to explain over a brief phone call. "Everything's fine, Mom. Actually, it's more than fine. I might have some big news after today's meeting." What kind of news? Patricia Richardson's nursing instincts had always made her skilled at detecting when her children were holding back important information. "The kind that might change everything," Marcus said carefully. "Mom, what would you think if I told you I was considering becoming a business owner?" The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Marcus wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Patricia spoke, her voice quiet with surprise. "Marcus, what exactly is happening at that grocery store?" Over the next 20 minutes, Marcus found himself explaining everything: Eleanor's mentorship, the business education he'd received, the partnership proposal, and the presentation he was about to give. As he spoke, he realized how improbable the entire sequence of events sounded. "Let me make sure I understand," Patricia said when he finished. "This woman who you helped with groceries turns out to be a retired bank president who wants to make you her business partner. I know it sounds unbelievable." "Marcus," his mother interrupted, "it sounds like an answer to prayers I've been saying since you were 12 years old. Ever since your father left, I've watched you take care of everyone else instead of pursuing your own dreams. If someone recognizes your potential and wants to help you succeed, maybe it's time you recognized it too." Her words carried a weight that Marcus hadn't expected. "But what if I fail? What if I'm not ready for this kind of responsibility?" "Then you'll learn from the failure and try again," Patricia said with the practical wisdom that had guided their family through difficult times. "But Marcus, what if you succeed? What if this is exactly the opportunity you've been preparing for without even knowing it?" After ending the call with his mother, Marcus felt a clarity that had been missing the night before. He gathered his presentation materials, checked his appearance in the mirror one final time, and headed to Henderson's Market with a sense of purpose that felt entirely new. Tommy Henderson was waiting in his small office behind the customer service counter, surrounded by the perpetual clutter of invoices, supplier catalogs, and regulatory notices that seemed to multiply faster than he could process them. When Marcus knocked, Tommy looked up with the expression of someone hoping for good news but expecting complications. "Come in, Marcus. Let's see what you've put together." Marcus opened Eleanor's leather portfolio and began his presentation with the confidence born from thorough preparation. He walked Tommy through customer traffic patterns, explained the correlation between checkout speed and impulse purchases, and presented the financial analysis that demonstrated how self-checkout stations could pay for themselves within 18 months. But as he spoke, Marcus found himself thinking beyond the immediate proposal. He saw inefficiencies in Tommy's filing system, recognized opportunities in the supplier relationships, and noticed operational improvements that could be implemented immediately. Eleanor's training had fundamentally changed how he viewed every aspect of the business. "This is impressive work," Tommy said when Marcus finished, studying the vendor quotes and installation timelines. "Really impressive. Where did you learn to put together an analysis like this?" I've been studying retail operations in my spare time, Marcus replied, still not ready to reveal Eleanor's involvement. I think Henderson's market has tremendous potential, but we need to modernize our approaches to compete effectively. Tommy leaned back in his chair, looking at Marcus with an expression that mixed respect with something that might have been relief. You know, my father built this business by working harder than anyone else and treating customers like family. Those principles are still important, but the retail landscape has changed so much in the past decade. He gestured toward the cluttered office around them. I've been trying to manage everything the way Dad did, but I'm not him. I don't have his instincts for business, and honestly, I've been struggling to keep up with all the changes. Marcus recognized the opening he'd been hoping for. What if you didn't have to manage everything alone? What do you mean? I mean, what if you had a partner, someone who could handle the operational side while you focused on what you do best? Maintaining customer relationships and preserving the community connection that makes Henderson's special. Tommy's expression shifted to surprise, then curiosity. Are you talking about some kind of management position? I'm talking about a partnership, Marcus said, pulling out the preliminary agreement Eleanor had prepared. I have access to investment capital, and I've developed a comprehensive plan for modernizing Henderson's while maintaining its community focus. For the next hour, Marcus presented Eleanor's complete business plan as if it were his own creation. He explained the market research, outlined the proposed improvements, and walked Tommy through financial projections that showed a path to sustained profitability. As he spoke, he realized he wasn't just presenting someone else's ideas. He understood every aspect of the plan and could envision himself implementing each component. Tommy listened with growing amazement, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated his gradual comprehension of the proposal's scope. This level of planning, Marcus, this looks like something that would come from a major consulting firm. Sometimes the best solutions come from people who understand the business from the ground up, Marcus replied, echoing something Eleanor had taught him. I've been working here long enough to see both the challenges and the opportunities. When Marcus finished, Tommy sat quietly for several minutes, studying the partnership agreement and financial projections. 60% ownership for a $150,000 investment, he said finally. That values the business at $250,000, which reflects both the current assets and the growth potential we could achieve. Together, Marcus confirmed, you'd retain significant ownership while gaining the capital and operational expertise to compete successfully. Tommy looked up from the documents with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. I need to ask you something directly, Marcus. Is this really your plan, or are you representing someone else's interests? The question caught Marcus off guard, but he realized that honesty was the only foundation for a successful partnership. I'm working with a business mentor who has extensive experience in retail operations and access to investment capital. But every observation in this plan, every operational improvement, every customer insight, that's based on my direct experience working here. Who is this mentor? Marcus hesitated, then decided that Eleanor's identity was relevant to Tommy's decision. Eleanor Whitmore. She's a retired bank president who specializes in small business development. Tommy's reaction was immediate and dramatic. Eleanor Whitmore. You're working with Eleanor Whitmore. You know her. Marcus, every business owner in Cedar Falls knows Eleanor Whitmore. She approved the original loan that allowed my father to buy this store 30 years ago. She's legendary in the local business community. Tommy stared at the partnership agreement with new understanding. If Eleanor Whitmore is backing this proposal, then she sees something in you that goes far beyond your current position. The weight of that recognition settled over Marcus like a mantle of responsibility. She believes I can succeed, but ultimately, this decision is about whether you believe we can work together to build something better than what exists now." Tommy studied the documents one more time, then looked directly at Marcus. "I've been dreading the conversation I thought I'd have to have with my employees next month about reduced hours, possible layoffs, maybe even closing the store. Instead, you're offering me a chance to not just survive, but actually thrive." Picked up a pen and placed it next to the partnership agreement. "I have one condition. I want to meet with Eleanor Whitmore before I sign anything. If she's willing to invest in this venture, I want to hear directly from her why she believes it will succeed." Marcus felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervous anticipation. "I can arrange that meeting." Good. Because Marcus, if this works the way you've outlined, you're not just talking about saving Henderson's Market. You're talking about creating something that could serve as a model for independent retailers throughout the region. As Marcus gathered his presentation materials, he realized that regardless of what happened next, he had already succeeded in ways he'd never imagined possible. 6 weeks ago, he'd been a grocery store clerk with abandoned dreams. Today, he was a business strategist capable of developing comprehensive plans for organizational transformation. The partnership agreement remained unsigned, but Tommy's willingness to meet with Eleanor represented a commitment to seriously consider the proposal. More importantly, it validated Marcus's growing belief that he possessed the skills and vision necessary to succeed as a business owner. Walking out of Henderson's Market that morning, Marcus felt the weight of impending change. By the end of the week, he would either remain an employee with expanded responsibilities or become a business partner with the opportunity to implement everything Eleanor had taught him. The decision was no longer about whether he was ready for this opportunity. The decision was about whether he had the courage to embrace a future that exceeded every expectation he'd ever held for himself. The meeting between Eleanor and Tommy Henderson took place on Wednesday afternoon in the conference room of Eleanor's former law firm. Marcus arrived early, his stomach tight with anticipation, carrying a leather briefcase that Eleanor had given him the day before, another symbol of his transformation from grocery clerk to business professional. Eleanor entered the conference room with the commanding presence that must have served her well during decades of high-stakes banking negotiations. She wore a tailored navy suit that spoke of quiet authority, and when she shook Tommy's hand, Marcus could see his boss's surprise at meeting someone so different from the elderly woman he might have expected. "Mr. Henderson," Eleanor began, settling into her chair with practiced ease. I want to start by acknowledging what you've accomplished with Henderson's Market. Maintaining an independent grocery store for 30 years in today's retail environment is no small achievement." Tommy visibly relaxed at her words. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore, though I have to admit the past few years have been challenging." Which is exactly why Marcus's proposal represents such an important opportunity, Eleanor continued. "I've spent considerable time studying your business, and I believe Henderson's Market has the potential to become a showcase for how independent retailers can compete successfully in the modern marketplace." For the next 45 minutes, Eleanor presented a business vision that went far beyond the partnership agreement Marcus had shown Tommy. She outlined plans for Henderson's Market to become the anchor store for a revitalized downtown district, explained how their customer-focused approach could attract shoppers from across the region, and described opportunities for expansion that could include catering services, specialty food products, and even franchise locations. "The investment we're proposing isn't just about saving your current operation," Eleanor explained, displaying architectural renderings that showed a completely transformed store layout. "It's about creating a sustainable business model that Could serve as a template for independent grocers throughout Iowa and beyond. Tommy studied the renderings with growing amazement. This is extraordinary, Mrs. Whitmore, but I have to ask, why Henderson's Market? With your resources, you could invest in any number of opportunities. Eleanor glanced at Marcus before answering. Because 6 weeks ago, I watched your employee demonstrate the kind of character that can't be manufactured or taught. Marcus saw someone he thought needed help, and he acted without hesitation, without expecting recognition or reward. That's the foundation of successful business leadership. She opened a folder containing what appeared to be financial statements and market research. But character alone isn't enough to justify this level of investment. Over the past month, I've observed Marcus analyze your operations, identify improvement opportunities, and develop solutions that demonstrate natural business instincts that many MBA graduates never acquire. Tommy turned to Marcus with an expression of newfound respect. You've been evaluating our entire operation? I've been learning, Marcus replied. Every aspect of the business, from customer flow patterns to supplier relationships to inventory management. Eleanor taught me to see the store as an integrated system where every component affects every other component. Eleanor pulled out a thick document that Marcus recognized as her complete business plan for Henderson's transformation. What I'm proposing is a partnership that leverages Tommy's community relationships, Marcus's operational insights, and my business experience to create something entirely new in Cedar Falls. As the meeting progressed, Marcus watched Tommy's initial skepticism transform into genuine excitement. Eleanor's vision was compelling not just for its financial potential, but for its emphasis on preserving the community-focused values that had made Henderson special while adapting to contemporary market realities. The self-checkout stations Marcus proposed are just the beginning, Eleanor explained. We're talking about online ordering systems, expanded organic and local food sections, community event hosting, senior shopping hours, and partnerships with local restaurants for prepared meal offerings. Tommy shook his head in wonder. This goes so far beyond what I ever imagined possible for our little store. That's because you've been thinking about survival instead of growth, Eleanor said gently. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a natural response to difficult circumstances. But with the right partnership and adequate capital, Henderson's Market can move from surviving to thriving. The formal signing took place the following Friday morning. Marcus arrived at the law firm wearing his first business suit, purchased with money he'd saved specifically for this occasion. As he reviewed the final partnership agreement, he marveled at how dramatically his life had changed in just 7 weeks. The document established Henderson's Market LLC as a new entity, with Eleanor holding 35% ownership, Marcus holding 25%, and Tommy retaining 40%. Marcus would serve as general manager with full operational authority, while Eleanor would function as strategic advisor, and Tommy would focus on community relations and customer service excellence. Marcus, Eleanor said as they prepared to sign, I want you to understand something important. This partnership isn't charity, and it's not an experiment. I'm investing in Henderson's Market because I believe it will be profitable. I'm partnering with you because I believe you have the skills and character to make it successful. When Marcus signed his name on the partnership agreement, he felt the weight of responsibility settling around him like a mantle. At 22, he was now part owner of a business that employed 12 people and served thousands of customers annually. The transformation of Henderson's Market began immediately. Construction crews arrived the following Monday to install the self-checkout stations and reconfigure the store layout according to Eleanor's efficiency studies. Marcus worked 16-hour days, coordinating renovations while maintaining normal operations and learning the countless details of business ownership. Emma Richardson visited during the second week of construction, bringing lunch for Marcus and surveying the controlled chaos of the renovation with amazement. "I can't believe this is really happening," she said, watching workers install new refrigeration units that would triple their fresh produce capacity. "Neither can I, sometimes," Marcus admitted, reviewing a delivery schedule on his new tablet. "Computer, but it feels right, you know, like everything I've experienced has been preparing me for this." The grand reopening took place 6 weeks later, on a crisp Saturday morning in early December. A ribbon-cutting ceremony attracted over 200 community members, including the mayor, local business leaders, and customers who had been shopping at Henderson's for decades. Marcus stood beside Eleanor and Tommy as they addressed the crowd, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment that went far beyond business success. Henderson's Market had become something unprecedented in Cedar Falls, a thoroughly modern grocery store that maintained the personal service and community connection that made independent retailers special. The first week's sales figures exceeded even Eleanor's optimistic projections. The self-checkout stations reduced wait times and increased impulse purchases exactly as Marcus had predicted. The expanded organic section attracted younger families who had previously driven to larger cities for specialty items. The online ordering system with curbside pickup proved especially popular with working parents and elderly customers. But for Marcus, the most meaningful moment came during the store's third week of operation. Eleanor arrived for her weekly grocery shopping, moving through the modernized aisles with obvious satisfaction at seeing her investment plans successfully implemented. When she reached Marcus's checkout station, she placed her items on the counter, with the same careful precision he remembered from their first encounter. This time, however, her cart contained specialty items from their expanded gourmet section, fresh flowers from their new floral department, and prepared meals from their deli counter. "How does it feel?" Eleanor asked as Marcus scanned her purchases. "To see a vision become reality?" Marcus paused, considering the question seriously. Around them, customers moved efficiently through a store that buzzed with activity and purpose. The self-checkout stations hummed quietly. The expanded produce section displayed vibrant fruits and vegetables from local farms, and the customer service counter handled a steady stream of online order pickups. "It feels like the beginning," Marcus said finally. "We've proven that the concept works here in Cedar Falls. Now I want to see if we can help other independent retailers achieve the same transformation." Eleanor's smile was radiant with pride and satisfaction. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say, because I've been thinking about our next project." As Marcus completed Eleanor's transaction, he realized that their partnership had created something far more valuable than a successful business renovation. They had developed a replicable model for independent retail success and proven that strategic thinking, adequate capital, and committed execution could overcome seemingly insurmountable competitive disadvantages. 6 months later, Marcus stood before a conference of independent retailers in Des Moines, presenting the Henderson's market transformation as a case study in small business revitalization. In the audience, Eleanor listened with the satisfaction of a mentor watching her protégé exceed every expectation. The grocery store clerk, who had once spent $5 to help an elderly customer, had become a business leader whose innovations were being studied and replicated throughout the Midwest. But more importantly, Marcus had discovered that success wasn't just about achieving personal goals. It was about creating opportunities for others to succeed as well. Eleanor had taught him that the most valuable legacy wasn't financial wealth, but the knowledge and character that could be passed from one generation to the next. As Marcus concluded his presentation to thunderous applause, He understood that his journey from grocery clerk to business owner was just the first chapter in a much larger story of mentorship, community transformation, and the enduring power of recognizing potential in unexpected places. The $5 he'd spent on soup and groceries had become an investment that paid returns far beyond anything either he or Eleanor could have imagined. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create ripples that transform entire communities, proving that generosity and vision, combined with careful preparation and unwavering commitment, can accomplish what seems impossible. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.